Everybody, welcome back to Capitalism Remix. Can't wait to get started today. Bringing on my man Thibault Manekin, Seawall Development here in Baltimore. We're having a great conversation just about his background, his history, the work that he's done all over the world. Can't wait for you to hear it. Welcome back. This is the Remix. Thibault, my man,
What's up, brother?
how you doing?
So good. So good. How you doing?
So I couldn't be better, man. I couldn't be better. As you and I were just talking about, I'm sitting down here in Naples, Florida. Came down here for a bunch of meetings, but sitting out on my one of our investors has a place down here, so sitting on his lanai, and that's where I'm doing the call from today. So, you know,
I had this vision as you've been describing this to me as we've been talking, because the last time I saw you, you were on the way to a boat show over on the Eastern Shore.
yeah.
And I had this vision that you bought one of those dream boats that you were telling me about,
Yeah.
and that you drove it down to Florida and it's docked at some marina and you're living the life down there.
No, no, not quite there yet, but not bad. This is not a bad place to do calls from. So,
For sure.
where are you? You at home?
Yeah, we're at home. Yep. Little Bat Farm.
Yeah.
Doing some work from here today and enjoying this nice, almost like spring-like weather in Baltimore. We'll take it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm actually I'll be back on Friday, but hey, so let's jump into it. First of all, thanks for joining me, man. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So, thanks for doing this. I know you're busy.
I,
Um,
I I don't I don't know if you remember, but feels like over a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, when I was first coming back to Baltimore,
yeah.
um, you came into my orbit around this conscious capitalism movement.
Yep.
Because you were at the forefront of it, and you and a handful of guys were talking about it before others knew about it.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like I was such an outsider to it, but feeling that was the things you guys were talking about were the secret sauce to how we should show up to work, how we should show up to community, how we should show up to our families and the tribes that we're a part of. And so to have watched what you've done with it and kind of seen it come almost full circle, and now to be in this kind of space together
Yeah.
where every time we see each other we're having these kinds of conversations is really special. So before we really get going, and just so much gratitude to you for taking that road less traveled and kind of believing in it and sticking to it the entire time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for that, Tebow. A lot I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of people. My guy Ed Freeman down at UVA and Raj
Sure.
Sisodia, and so standing on the shoulders of a lot of people who showed me a different way to about doing things. So, but I appreciate that. But that leads to sort of one of the things I wanted to talk about, because I wanted you to give me the backstory, of the business, right, of Seawall, and sort of talk to me about how this is all manifested for you, because in a lot of ways, I talk about this and write about this and try to train entrepreneurs to think this way, but Raj and Ed and my old partner Rick Fraser, we've been saying for years is that we didn't really make any of this up. We saw people doing it and then tried to codify it. So that I put you in that category, to be quite honest with you. So I would love to just sort of get the backstory of Seawall and how you think about why you do it the way you do it, right? Um, and how you think about that.
Yeah. So in order to do that, I need to step further back, and I'll try to skip through the beginning part of this story as quickly as I can. But I grew up in Baltimore, right? And from a pretty young age, I had these two pretty formative experiences that lit these two questions inside my heart. And those questions are, why are we so divided as human beings? And what are the creative ways that we can bridge those divides? And to a certain extent, like, I didn't know it at the time, but those two questions became my purpose, right? My North Star. And as I made my way through middle school and high school and then eventually college, the more I asked those questions, which was every single day, the further away I felt like I was from an answer to them.
Uh-huh.
So I graduated college, and I really realized that in life we have two choices. We can sit on the sidelines and hope that someone else does the heavy lifting, or we can realize that if we want to see real change, if we want to have significant impact, we have to roll up our sleeves and become a part of the solution. And so I got with two friends and I helped them create this international nonprofit called Peace Players, right? And the idea is that we would go to war-torn countries, deeply divided countries, and we would use sports, in our case basketball, to get two kids from two sides of a conflict meeting each other, finding common ground, and hopefully over time becoming friends. So we raised like 8,000, maybe $10,000, and I was 21 years old at the time, Jeff. Like, it felt like $1 million, right? Like, I thought we might be able to retire with this $10,000 that we just
Exactly.
raised. And it was enough to get on a plane to South Africa, where I met my friend Sean right after the fall of apartheid. And we started dribbling basketballs in black townships and rural areas and affluent white suburbs. For those of you not familiar with South Africa, who haven't been there, to this day, and it certainly was an incredibly divided place, right? And so the program really started to take off. Kids started coming out the woodworks, wanting to participate and play. Schools were signing up. Parents loved it because it was a bit of a new sport. Coaches. And after about 3 months, we had gained so much momentum. Like, we couldn't wait to wake up every single morning. You had no idea what was going to happen in any given day other than forward progress. And that's not to say that like every day didn't have major, major challenges, obstacles, no's, can'ts, things that got thrown in front of us that might have made the goal feel impossible to achieve. But for us at that stage, in this naive stage of the development of a new brand and a new company, it was just exciting, right? And we just charged forward where failure wasn't an option.
Yeah.
And we get a call, we're just about out of money and we're doing everything we can to raise it. We get a call and it's Nelson Mandela. And he says that he's a huge believer in the power of
Just a call from Nelson Mandela. Yeah. That's wild.
that he's a huge believer in the power of sports to unite. Right. I don't know if you saw the movie Invictus, but when he gets released,
Yeah.
he gets released from prison after 30 years of being oppressed and he becomes president. And the first thing he does is come out and publicly support the white rugby team, the South African national team. And they go on to win the World Cup that year under his leadership. And it was just
Right.
amazing. Right. And he understands that sports has this ability to bring people together, which is what we understood. And I think at the core of it. So anyway, so he comes on and he says, I want to become your largest supporter.
How
So
do you think you got on his radar?
there wasn't a minute in any given day that we weren't having conversations with people about the work that we were doing. I mean, we were flying up to Johannesburg and meeting with people that were in prison with him, right?
Yeah.
Meeting with, the South African version of like freedom fighters,
Yeah.
who had committed their lives through the ANC, which is the branch of the government that Mandela was a part of, to ending apartheid. Like, really powerful people with
Yeah.
incredible stories. And I'll digress a little bit. I would fly up to Johannesburg, and I would always bring one of our coaches or managers, at least one of them, with me, because it was never my story to tell. Right,
Yeah.
this idea of sports to unite, it never belonged to me or to Sean or Brendan or any of the other few folks that had kind of helped to get the idea off the ground.
Yep.
We always realized that if it was going to work, it had to be run by the local people and it was their story to tell. So we'd get these meetings and I'd help set them up. And my role, Jeff, in the meeting was to say, thank you so much for seeing us. I want to introduce you to my good friend Akona, or my buddy Tabani, or my buddy Menzi, or my buddy Mtogo. And then I would disappear into the background and these coaches would tell stories of the horrors of apartheid, of watching their older brothers gunned down in front of them in their homes, of having to carry passes to leave the townships during certain hours just to be able to go grocery shopping. And then they would tell the story of this crazy new sport of basketball and how for the first time in their lives, they felt like they had purpose, and that they were able to give back to the future generation and the kids that they were coaching. So it was amazing. And I would sit there with my heart just glowing. Right. And so we did that nonstop.
Yep.
And the word got back to him. Right. And
So
he called up.
he calls.
He calls and so we go from no credibility and very little money to his money behind us and a lot of it, but most importantly, the name recognition of Nelson Mandela
Yep.
supporting this fairly new organization. And from then on, like the floodgates opened, right? The program in South Africa exploded. We got invited to replicate the model all over the world. We already had a little program in Northern Ireland going. We were invited to the Middle East to run programs between Israeli and Palestinians. We're deep in that conversation today, right?
Yeah,
We're
right.
all seeing how hard that region continues to deal with conflict, right? And in Cyprus and in Yemen. And so for in my 20s, I had a backpack and a suitcase, and I bounced around from country to country, helping to set up the infrastructure for this program that would bring people together through sports. And I loved it because every day I was in service of my purpose. The
Yep.
two questions that got me out of bed every morning: why are we so divided as human beings? And what are the creative ways that we can do to, what are the creative things we can do to bridge those divides?
Yep.
And every day I was living that truth, right? So I come back to Baltimore, and I'd come back maybe like once a year to visit family. And I'm back, and I couldn't sleep the night before, and I ended up kind of getting in my car and just driving. You know those drives you do sometimes?
Yep.
Like, you're just kinda
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
clear your head.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're going for a walk, sometimes it's a meditation, sometimes it's a drive. And Jeff, I pull over my car at the intersection of Pennsylvania and North Avenue in Baltimore. You're
Yep.
familiar with it, right?
Very, very.
Um, this is the intersection that 9 years later, in 2015, would be the epicenter of the Freddie Gray uprising in our
Yep.
city.
Yep.
This is the intersection where we watched the world watch the CVS burn to the ground.
Yep.
This was a part of town that I'd been made to believe my entire life, right or wrong, that I wouldn't be welcome in and that I wouldn't be safe in. That was the narrative that existed in the circles that I grew up in.
Yep.
And this experience of living around the world had taught me that only on the other side of other people's narratives are the answers to the things that or to the questions that I'm trying to answer. Right.
Mhm.
So in South Africa, everyone was like, whatever you do, don't go into any of the black townships. You'll die. You'll get kidnapped. Like, really bad things will happen. In the Middle East, whatever you do, don't go into the West Bank. In Cyprus, in Northern Ireland, there was always a place that I shouldn't go.
Yep.
And as soon as someone told me I shouldn't go, they were the first place I would go.
Out you went. Yeah.
And only out of a place of curiosity, right? Like going in with like a big open heart and just wondering, um, am I missing something?
Yeah.
And being able to kind of really listen deeply. And so I'm pulled over the side of the road, and I get out of my car and I start walking around. And I guess about halfway through the walk, and I see all the things that like society would tell me that I would see, right?
Yep.
The
Mhm.
drug dealers on the corners, the liquor stores every few blocks, the abandoned homes, the shuttered buildings, the guys nodding off on the intersections, right? But I knew there was more to this part of Baltimore that I hadn't explored yet. And about halfway through my walk, I have these two realizations. The first is that real estate, the control and ownership of land, is the most powerful connected industry on our planet. And historically, it's done more to divide us and keep us apart than actually bring us together, right? And I'd seen this all over the world, with what the white regime had done in South Africa in throwing the black community into these informal settlements called townships with one road in and one road out, where it was controlled. I've seen it in Northern Ireland between a Protestant and Catholic community with a 60-foot high, in quotes, peace wall to stop people from throwing um, bombs at each other at night. I'd seen it, and we see it today, the fight for control and ownership of land in the Middle East,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I mean, at the end of the day, people are fighting for land
Yep.
and who controls it. Um,
Yeah.
and the other kind of like realization I had is that Baltimore, specifically, but our country of America is more divided than all of these so-called war-torn countries where I just spend so much time and energy. We have an inability here to have open and honest conversations about our differences and our similarities that I saw as a ticking time bomb. And look, we're seeing the results of that ticking time bomb, right? I'm not the only person who have said something like that in the early 2000s and before.
Yeah.
But it's becomes more complex with every day that goes by. And so I had this immediate sense of guilt and shame. One, like my family had grown up and had been a part of the real estate business in Baltimore for generations,
Yep.
and I had completely missed it. Um, and and that I just spent so much time in all these other countries, almost like pretending that Baltimore and America didn't exist and that there weren't real issues and challenges here.
Yep.
And so I go back to my car to get a pen and a pencil, and I start taking notes. And I call my dad up on my ride back, and because I feel this idea beginning to grow, and I invite him out to dinner. And my dad's my hero. He's
Yeah.
probably, talk about standing on the shoulder of giants. The greatest, most humble man that I've ever met, and have just learned so much from him over the years. And he had spent a bunch of years in the real estate industry, and he had gotten out because he had come to understand that it was all about making as much money as you could as fast as you possibly could,
Yep.
at maybe all costs and expense. And that wasn't the reason he had gotten in it to begin with. And so he got invited to become the chief operating officer of the Baltimore City public school system. And Jeff, he didn't even flinch. He left real estate altogether and dove into public education. And so while I was in South Africa and the Middle East helping to build this program, he had jumped deep into urban education in Baltimore and in this country.
Yep.
And so I took him out to dinner because I felt like he'd be the only person that I could really have this like sounding board of this experience that I just had. And we have this dinner, and I basically say, Dad, I want to start a real estate development company, and I want you to help me. And this is the opposite of anything I'd ever said. I wanted nothing to do with real
Yeah.
estate
Okay.
ever. For all the reasons my dad got out of it, it just felt like it was a soulless industry, right? And so, my dad like staring at me as if I just asked the worst question I could possibly ask. And there's
Yeah.
this super awkward silence between us. And he says, T, I've got no desire to ever get back into the real estate industry. And like now I'm crushed, right? It took all the courage in the world to ask
Yeah.
this guy this question. And he says, but you know what? I'd be really interested in starting a company that reimagined the real estate industry. And I said, tell me more.
Yeah.
And so for like 3 hours, we didn't even touch our food. We're riffing back and forth on the lived experiences we've had, him most recently in public education through Baltimore City, and me in the growing of this Peace Players organization around the world. And the importance of making sure that communities have a seat at the table, and understanding that the ideas that we work on aren't ours, that they've always existed, sitting on the tip of the universe's tongue, just waiting to be brought to life. And at the end, we say, well, let's do it, right? We're going to start a company,
Yep.
and it's going to be a real estate company. But the idea is that we're going to reimagine this industry so that buildings are used to empower communities, unite cities, and help to launch really powerful ideas. And we get up and we give each other this like huge hug, and it was the beginning of Seawall, right? Like
Yep.
that's how it came to be. And happy to talk about projects we've done and things we've worked on and the way that we've done it. But again, right, as I get ready to embark on this next chapter in my life, it's directly tied to my purpose. It's directly tied to those two questions that I ask.
Yep.
Why are we so divided? And what are the creative ways that we can bridge those divides? For 6 or 7 years, the creative ways for me was using the sport of basketball. Now, moving forward with this big hug with my dad and the launch of this Seawall company, it was how can we creatively use real estate to bring people together? So crazy, wild journey. I felt like I had to step back in order to
No,
start to step forward. And
it's such a great story, but it sort of encapsulates so many things that we talk about all the time. Like, I couldn't have told you that's what you should do, right? You could have asked me and I could have come up with some ideas, but I couldn't have told you that's what you should do. Why not? Because it's not my passion, it's your passion, right? And once you find your passion and then you find ways to make that passion come to light. This is you said something when you were talking about basketball that didn't belong to you, right? It's the same way I feel about, this idea, capitalism, the remix, why we're doing this podcast. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to guys like you. It belongs to the people out there who actually said, you know what? There's a better way to do this. And I have an idea, because I think that we can use these, business to bring people together, right? I think we can use business to create, I always talk about creating a more, I go on forever, just, joyous, equitable, prosperous society for all of us, right? And then people say, well, you can do that, but you can't make money doing that. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure that's true. Right. And then when we find people like you, I'm like, look, you just gotta. So I would like to, give an example, give everyone an example of, when so you're reimagining the real estate. Tell me what that means from a practical perspective. Like,
Ye Yeah, definitely. Let me just, with a lot of love, rephrase something you said. You said this idea of like, I have an idea, right? So the way that we are changing that narrative slightly is that there's an idea that exists.
yeah,
Because when we come out and say, I have an idea, you're already claiming that idea as your own,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so like I sit in these meetings with lots of people at any given day, when the difference between somebody saying, I have an idea, versus somebody who says there's an idea that I feel growing, or there's an
yeah,
idea that
yeah,
exists. What these things that we work on, Jeff, you, me, these amazing entrepreneurs that you are mentoring, um, they only work. They're so hard, right? The probabilities of success are almost zero,
yep,
and they only work when everybody that the idea touches feels the same sense of pride of ownership and authorship in what's being created as we do.
100%.
And the second that we throw the "I have an idea" in way of framing it up, we're going to begin to alienate people, and
Yeah,
not
that's a
significantly.
really
We
good
can come
point.
back from that. So
Yeah.
just a small shift in how we're even beginning the conversations around growing these things that we're working on.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. And one of the things I love about this, I learn something new every time, right? And that rephrasing makes a big difference, right? The nuance makes such a big difference.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Oh, so I'm trying to think of what story to tell around. So I think I'll tell the story of the first building that we did.
yeah,
So we start this company, and as a result of the work that my dad was doing in public education, he had a bunch of teachers coming up to him and saying that they were kind of showing up to Baltimore for the first time, and they were having a really hard time finding the right place to live. This was kind of before social media, and the internet existed, but not in the way that we know it today,
yeah,
where everything was at your fingertips. We were still figuring it out. And so these teachers were showing up to Baltimore for the first time. Baltimore City hires 1,000 new teachers each year. And a lot of them were coming from out of state. And you show up to Baltimore and you've got 5 days to get fingerprinted, to figure out where your school is, to start thinking through lesson plans, to figure out where your bank is, where your gym is, where you're going to live, who you're going to live with. And as a result of that, they were making bad living decisions. And then they were getting put into arguably the hardest working environment in our country, which is
yep,
educating the future generation, especially in our inner cities. And so that these teachers were saying, if there was a cool, funky apartment building where we could live with a bunch of teachers, it would make our lives easier. So my dad was like following that away, and then he was also interacting with a bunch of nonprofit organizations that were spread out through all over town, and having a hard time collaborating, even though they were doing the same thing. And so he wanted to take maybe like 4 or 5 teachers and put them in a little townhouse together, maybe 4 little
yep,
apartments, or find a little 5,000 square foot office building and put a couple nonprofits in. And so we started, as Seawall got going, looking around for those buildings. And we were looking around in all of the neighborhoods we thought people wanted to live in.
yeah,
Canton, Fells
yeah, yeah,
Point, Federal Hill, right? All the fancy neighborhoods.
yep,
And we couldn't find anything we could afford. We couldn't find anything that would make economic sense. And we just kept striking out after months and months and months. And we get a call from a friend of ours, this guy, Sam Polikoff. Many of you might know him. And he says, he's a developer in town. He says, hey, I know that you guys are looking for a building for these teachers and these education-focused nonprofits. There's a building on the corner of Howard and 26th Street in the neighborhood of Remington.
yep,
And I'm like trying to figure out where Howard and 26th Street is. I had never heard of the neighborhood of Remington by name. And he says that a developer from DC bought it a couple years ago. They tried to shove high-end apartments down the throats of the community, and the community ran them out of town,
yeah,
right? They
uh-huh,
fought him tooth and nail. The developers lost everything, and the bank was in the process of foreclosing. And so Sam keeps going. He's like, every developer in Baltimore has looked through this building, and every one of them has passed. Nobody wants to touch it. The neighborhood's impossible to get anything done. They fight everything. The building's collapsing. It's so old. And he goes on and on around why, but he says, well, I think the building would be perfect for you guys, right? And so,
Yeah.
look, we're months into this company. We're starting to question whether it's ever going to work. We're wondering if we're ever going to get our first project. And so we agree to meet Sam and the banker at the building for this tour. And it's this like gloomy day. We pull up to this 100,000 square foot, 4-story, 150-year-old, long vacant, abandoned
Perfect.
warehouse. Like,
Yeah.
Jeff, trees are growing through the roof. Every window's boarded up. Bricks are falling out from the side. I actually like look at my dad. I'm like trying to figure out if I should like laugh or cry, right? Like this is never going to work. And so we do a lap around and we meet the banker and Sam at the front, and they kick open this like massive door and we go on this tour. 3/4 of the building you couldn't walk through because the roof had collapsed in.
Yeah.
There were like soiled mattresses surrounded by heroin needles and booze bottles and crazy graffiti. It was like we were like a movie, right?
Yeah.
And we're walking through the building, Jeff, and the banker starts going off on the building. This place is disgusting. This neighborhood is the worst. That nothing will ever work here. At best, you're knocking this monstrosity down. And he's going on and on. And like, I had this shift because I'd been a part of these conversations around the world. I'd
Yep.
seen and heard the can't and no. I'd seen people look at what felt impossible and understood that if they weren't looking at it through the right lens, that it would be impossible. And so I start to tune the guy out, and I actually started to fall in love with the building. Like it was beautiful, like huge ceiling heights, beautiful timber, massive window openings, a cool courtyard that was a disaster at the time, but with some love and attention could have been really beautiful. And an hour after the tour, we're back on the street, breathing some fresh air. The banker finally has stopped talking. I actually haven't listened to him for about 45 minutes. And him and Sam leave, and my dad and I look at each other. He's got this glow in his eye too,
Yeah.
right? He sees the world the same way I do. And we give each other another one of these big hugs, and we're like, let's go. This is the one, right? And so for the next like week or two, we brought our most trusted advisors down to the building for a tour, right? So like our financial advisors are like folks who are actually really good at real estate, more better
Yeah.
than us. Um, we even brought our wives down, right? And so every one of them told us this would never work. You can never fix this building up, and it was too far gone. You'd never be able to make the economics work and keep the rents low for teachers and nonprofits. My dad tells this amazing story that my mom refused to sleep in the same room with him for a week after he brought her. She said, Donald, if you buy this building, it'll be the dumbest thing you've ever done.
Oh my God.
But we had fallen in love, right? With the idea, with the building. And so we invite these, we buy the building at foreclosure for, I want to say like pennies on the dollar, but a significant amount at the time.
Yep.
And we understand that most of these people are right, that pulling off this project is almost impossible. And in order to do it, we have to build a movement behind it, right? If this becomes the like Seawall or Donald Thibault show, it'll never work. And in order to build the movement, we say that you gotta do three things, right? Who's the end user, right?
Yeah.
And for us, that was the teachers and the nonprofits. So they had to be the architects of the project. So we recruit these 10 Baltimore City teachers and we invite them for a tour of the building. And my dad gives this incredible speech, and he basically says, there's this idea floating around there to create the country's first ever Center for Educational Excellence. We have no idea what we're doing. The idea has come from you and your peers. We're going to walk through this building, and if you like what you see, we want to invite you to be a part of the design team that designs and programs every square inch of this building. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think? And so the teacher said, let's go. And so we go in through that. Lead the same tour we've led 12 times at this point. The difference between this tour and the others is that these teachers are like effortlessly skipping through the building. also falling in love with it and pointing out all of the amazing qualities and not the things that are that feel like intimidating or less than great. So these teachers are fully bought in. They spend the next year designing every square inch of the building. We let them choose their own rents. They design their own amenities within their units, and they're fully bought in. We then do the same thing with the community. We go to the first community association meeting and we say the same thing when we're invited up to the front. This isn't our project. This building belongs to you. You all
Yeah.
have been staring at it in this abandoned state for decades at this point. There's a group of teachers and nonprofits that want to create the first Center for Educational Excellence. They would love to do it in Remington. Would you like, would you be supportive of the idea and would you help us grow it?
Yep.
Right. And so the community's all in, right? This is completely different than how any other developer has ever come to them.
100%.
In our
Yeah.
in their experience, developers come in and the developers tell them what it is that they're going to give them.
Right.
Right. And in the way that we were trying to change that narrative is that we were showing up for a place where this project, this first project in particular, actually belonged to the community. So they were all in, right? And so the end users and the community are all in, which are probably the hardest groups to have bought in. The project's taken off. We've got this design team that's working really hard on envisioning this dream and bringing it to a reality. And we get the pricing back from the contractor to build the building. And keep in mind, Jeff, that I thought our first project would cost about $1 million.
Yep.
That felt like an insurmountable number for the first project that we'd take on. And the pricing comes back and it's $20 million.
Oh my goodness.
And I knew that it would be high. I knew it would be more than $1 million. The problem wasn't the size of the project. The problem was that in order to keep the rents as low as we wanted to for the teachers and nonprofits,
Yeah.
we could only afford a $6 million loan on the project, which meant that there was a $14 million gap in the capital stack, and we had no idea what to do. But kind of like that Nelson Mandela story that I told you, where like the teachers were out talking and the nonprofits who we also had engaged were talking, the community was talking. Enough people were telling the story of this idea that was growing,
Yep.
that a group reached out to us that we had actually also connected with called Enterprise Community Partners.
Okay.
That created by the late Jim Rouse, who had created Columbia
Yeah.
and had invested heavily in Sandtown, Winchester. And they came to us and said that there's these really creative financing tools called historic tax credits, which the federal and state government gives you equity into your project if you're salvaging and keeping our country's oldest buildings.
Yep.
There's a program called New Market Tax Credits,
New
which
market.
encourage
Yep. Mhm.
the commercial investment in highly distressed census tracts. All of those fit within the project. And before you know it, like the phone's ringing off the hook from all of these investors that have heard this story of this Center for Educational Excellence in an old historic building, in a qualified census tract. And they're literally holding our hands through the financing. So within like 2 months, that $14 million gap had been completely eliminated through those credits. We had like $1 million left at the gap at the end of the day. And both the city and state stepped in for $500,000, like 1% low interest rate loans, because they too saw the importance of rolling out the red carpet for the people who were doing the most important work in our cities. And that was anybody focused on educating the future generation. And so miraculously, we closed financing. 3 months after closing financing and starting construction, the building's 100% leased. I will say that we closed financing the week before Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, right? So at a time when the world was completely upside down,
Yep.
we were wondering if we had just made the worst decision in our lives. But the groundswell had been created. We didn't spend $1 on marketing, and all of these teachers and nonprofits had gone out and said, there's this developer that has let us like hand pick and hand design our dream live work scenario.
Yeah.
And you got to follow it. And if it comes to fruition, you got to get in. By the time we finished the construction, Jeff, there was a waiting list of over 300 teachers waiting to get in.
Oh my goodness.
There were over a dozen nonprofits that we had run out of space for. And it was just such a beautiful reminder of like how we started this conversation of the when you approach it, the growth of an idea and don't claim it as your own,
Yeah.
when you engage the end users and the communities and they really take it and run with it, then it's hard to stop the momentum that's been created. And that's kind of what we experienced in that first project.
Dude, I'm telling you. So this is it's so interesting to me because, like you said, I was talking about this when I came to town, but that's 4 or 5 years later, right? And everyone, pardon the noise in the background. As we said, I'm traveling, so I'm sitting outside. But that's 4 or 5 years later when I got to town, and I'm already looking at what you've done and what you're doing, going, all right, this is a guy who gets it. He understands what we're talking about. The interesting thing is when you talk about Lehman Brothers, right? This is when, when we first started down this path to think about how could we rethink the purpose of business in society. And we sold our previous company, me and my business partner, Rick Frazier. I tell people, and as you know, I'm an architect by training, so love this story. I say, I did what any self-respecting architect would do in the middle of a financial crisis. I moved back to New York and started a hedge fund. And we launched a fund in 2008 in the midst of the and thinking to ourselves, have we lost our minds? What have we gotten ourselves into? But the part of the connection here between us is that we were able to raise, and for us was a obscene amount of money between 2008 and 2010 because we were investing in companies that we thought were run by people who thought like you, that they were creating value for not just for shareholders, but for employees and suppliers and communities and customers. And we thought that those companies, no matter what the market environment, were going to do well. Why do we think that? Just because of what you said, because they were creating something more akin to a movement, that they had all of these people around them who cared if they succeeded. And it just turned out to be true. Everyone thought, how did you guys raise $700 million between 2008 and 2011? We're like, you know what? We're really not that smart. We just think that this makes perfect sense, that those companies are going to succeed. So that the parallel between sort of what you were doing then and what we were seeing in at the same time is sort of uncanny. And then I think about, there's a group that, because, in my architectural world, there's a group out of New York called Designing the We. I don't know if you know those guys.
Sure, I know that.
Yeah. And we always thought that, yeah, if you bring all the end users together, if you bring the community together, you're gonna have a better project, right? And not, you know, some of it was about creating the movement, but some of it was about it just makes sense that instead of us saying we're gonna put this in the midst of you, we're asking what would really work well here that you guys could get behind. So it's a really interesting. I love those parallels. Um, I how did that so then, I wanted to talk about the book, and I'm not sure this is the
You-
time to
you-
do it, but
but maybe before that, I do
yeah,
want to I want to expand upon what you're saying because it really resonates. There's I want to be uh, I want to be clear that the projects that Seawall has done make money,
yeah.
right? There's a lot of times you look at this stuff and
No, it's a good point. I
um
was gonna ask that, so I'm glad you've gone down this path.
yeah, that there's a lot of times there's these super altruistic things that exist out there, but they don't end up making money, right? And we it's if the product that you're the idea that you're growing, the product that you're bringing to market, the building that you're building isn't financially successful, right? Like for me, um, you lose the tool that allows you to be in service
Right.
of your purpose.
100%. Yeah.
So, if the basketball program that we were running, we didn't exist to make money, right? Um, but if we weren't able to get the funding and the resources, if the product wasn't incredible, if we weren't able to get the funding and resources behind it, then we lose the product and we lose our ability to have this tool that allows us to wake up every day with the biggest smile on our faces and our hearts because we're directly doing the thing that's the most important to us. And
And
there's
to
a
answer that question that you started, the 2 questions you
yeah,
started with,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And it's the same in building. Now look, when we kept the rents artificially low for the teachers and the nonprofits, for sure we were leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars of annual cash flow on the table, right? Um, but we understood that one, we were in it for the long game, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
That there were other ways to generate fees for the work that we were doing. They would keep the lights on. Um, and that if we were doing something different enough, it would attract a pool of supporters and investors that might otherwise sit on the sidelines in these really complicated times.
right.
So much so that our first few projects were so successful. And, we all define success differently. For us, they needed to cash flow, um, but not make exorbitant amounts of money. Um, and they had to be in service of the end users in the community who were the ones requesting the things that we were building. That the projects had been so successful that we started getting all of these investors calling us. Really, um, we started to need to raise money, right? We needed to
Uh-huh.
start raising capital for our businesses. Like we didn't have personal money to put into projects. First few projects were all financed through really creative tax credit financing, but eventually that runway was going to end
Yep.
and we would need to get creative otherwise. So we needed to start raising millions of dollars. And we went out to interview a bunch of big kind of hedge funds, institutional investors, and we left those meetings almost sick to our stomach,
Yeah.
right? The loss of control, the inability to really be in service of community because you were always had somebody looking over your shoulder, figuring out how fast they were going to get their money back and what the multiple was going to be on it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And we after maybe a dozen of these meetings, we said something doesn't feel right. And we said we need to go find the investors. And a bunch of them had already been reaching out to us who are aligned with the kind of work that we want to be doing.
Yep.
And so we ended up finding these 8 Baltimore families who had done really well for themselves, who wanted to invest in projects that they would be proud to walk their grandkids through,
Yeah.
right? And it was this really cool symbiotic relationship, right? So we set up this structure where it was a 50-50 split in ownership.
Okay.
I'm buddies with like Dave Bramble and like a bunch of, other developers. And every time I'm with Bramble, he's like, you got a 50-50 split on your deal? That's crazy. And he's just laughing hysterically at me, right? And so, a typical split might be 90-10 if you're lucky.
Right.
Um, but we worked with these families and they were so in love with the purpose behind every project, that they were more focused on that than in any overwhelming financial return. And what we've been able to do is blend the two,
Yep.
right? Be able to deliver incredible products, incredible projects, with strong financial returns that they have the priority on over us, and where at the end of the day, everybody feels really good about it. But a lot of times when we talk about this social impact work, we forget about the importance of making sure that the work actually is profitable.
It's gotta be
And
viable. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's, we have a similar view of the world when I talk about conscious capitalism. Some people just hear the consciousness part and not the capitalism part. I'm
That's
like,
right.
no, you have to bring those 2 things together, right?
That's
Because,
right.
Raj has been, Sisodio, the author of Conscious Capitalism, Forms of Endearment, has been known to say of late, if you're starting a business, and obviously there's a continuum, Thibault, right? There's some things that can be and should be done by not-for-profits. And there's a continuum along there. I mean, we're not saying that not-for-profits, there's no place in the world for them. Of course there is. But Roger's always said, been saying of late, if you start a business and you haven't found the way to make that business financially viable, well, that's sort of immoral, because if you start a business the way that we want to start a business in service of something bigger than yourself, well, how can you have to sort of make that thing sustainable, or else you have no ability to create that thing in the end, that service, that thing that you're passionate about. You can't answer that question right? Or it's harder to answer that question. Why are we so divided? And what creative things can we do to cure that if we don't have the resources to be creative, right?
I think about that a lot, and just like you, I get to talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out their path, and they come with these really, probably like you, I think folks are drawn to me for the, like, consciousness side of the businesses that we're helping to grow.
Right.
And that's where the coaching around, like, capitalist side has to come into play too. Um, but I find a lot of them come and say, "Hey, I'm probably just going to run this as a nonprofit," right? And to me, I feel like the nonprofit is, um, it's the easy way out, right? It's the path of least resistance. It's the
Yeah.
way that everyone's always done it. It's kind of the way that, like, my father's generation might have thought. And I encourage these folks because you'll never try harder or care more to grow something than if you actually own it yourself. And when you're the executive director of a nonprofit, you don't own it.
Right.
You might tell yourself you do. You might feel incredible love and passion for it, and all of those things matter and are real. I'm not discounting any of those. And Baltimore got some incredible nonprofit
Right.
leaders. Um, but it's like it's the you never truly have the sense of love for it and would die for it the way you would if you actually owned it. And there are ways, Seawall is living proof of that,
Yep.
to be able to blend the two things together. And you know this more than anyone, the conscious side with the capitalistic side. And that's the sauce. And that's where we need to push our young entrepreneurs to,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
days, and not necessarily take the path of least resistance, which is which is in my opinion the nonprofit route.
Yeah. At some other point, we're going to run up on time here, and I want to get to something else that's near and dear to our hearts. But at some other point, we should talk about that because I've got so many ideas about this narrative about the purpose of business in society and how it captures us. And I think that even for people who say, "I want to do something great," and therefore it should be a not for profit. They're caught in the same narrative. They don't even realize that they're caught in the same story, that it's all about the money and it always has to be all about the money. And if you want to do anything good, you can't do it in a for profit. So they're caught in the same story. And I have that discussion all the time. That would be a topic for another podcast with you and I, another discussion.
Episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2. Yeah. But in the little few minutes we have left here, let's get to something that you and I have been involved in here for a couple of months now, the Baltimore Band of Brothers, or B3, if you call it. Yeah.
Let's go.
Tell everyone about where that came from, and what's the vision and where's it at?
I'm actually going to flip this question back to you, but I'll set a little bit of context for it. So, for most of my life, most of my adult life, I've done a lot of men's work where I've gotten on planes, and I'm a part of a group called Alpha Tribe. And once a year, we'll meet up somewhere in the country and we'll get together with 30 or 40 men from around the world and do really deep, soul fulfilling men's work, almost to the point that we're being broken down and rebuilt. And every time I leave one of these sessions, they're usually 3 or 4 days long, I get back on the plane and, like, my soul is full, my heart is full, I'm completely rejuvenated. I've let out emotion, I've been super vulnerable, I've fully showed up in every ounce of everything that I've gotten to give, and I just feel complete. And the last time that I did that, and I was flying back and I landed in Baltimore, I'm like, why do I have to get on a plane to do this?
Right.
Right. And who are and where are all of those really conscious men in Baltimore? And let's bring them together and let's start doing the work. Because look, for all of us in Baltimore, like, we're grinding, right? We are doing the work. We're in it.
Yep.
And um, like in life, but certainly in Baltimore, we tend to operate in these silos. And all of this is hard. And so what's the opportunity to bring a small group together and just kind of experiment. So with a lot of intentionality, I started to put together a group. And it started off by asking myself, like, who are the men who are out there every single day trying to move the needle in this city? I want to say like high level, like CEOs, definitely executive suites types folks, but who are looking at and feeling the world in a little bit of a different way.
Yep.
And how can we bring them together? And then the second thing that I did was, with a lot of intentionality, I wanted to make sure that half the men were white and half the men were black. That's a hard dynamic to find in Baltimore,
Yep.
and a hard one to have really meaningful, vulnerable conversations. And this is the point that I want to flip it back to you, because like I came to you and said, Jeff, I need you.
Yeah.
Would you join this group that eventually ended up getting called B3? But I'd love to hear like your experience, what you thought it was going to be, and I don't know how much time we have left, but
Yeah.
what it ended up meaning for you.
Yeah, well, we could take as long as we want, but I don't want to keep you all day. But so it's that's a great question, Thibault. Um, I obviously, when you came to me and asked, and you said, this is who sort of signed on already. Lots of folks that I knew and people I've been around with for, Joe McClinsky, Brian Leggett, people I've been around for a long time, and then a bunch of folks I didn't know, right? And not being from Baltimore. And what, coming in and being in the finance business was interesting. I knew less of the black guys than I did of the white guys, right? Just because of the how I came. I'm not from here. A lot of those guys were from here and hadn't run in those circles, different circles. So that was interesting. But I hadn't done a lot of men's work before joining up with you guys to do this. So I was a little bit skeptical. Not skeptical, I guess apprehensive is a better way to say it. Not skeptical. I was apprehensive just because I hadn't done it and didn't know what to expect. And my wife talked me, helped talk me into it. I mean, generally, if you and Leggett call me and ask me to do something, I'm going to try to do it, right? So there was that piece too. But my wife was like, expand your mind a little bit. Go do something outside of your comfort zone, because she knows that I like to stay in my comfort zone. So apprehensive at first, didn't know what to expect, didn't know half the group, which was fine. But I'm telling you, it's really, it's been another one of those inflection points in my life, I think. Um, One was when, I got out of college and, decided to start my own business. I'd never done anything like that before. Then I met Raj Sisodia and started to think about, this idea about capitalism. Do we have it right, or is there something more? Could we change it? And along the path, lots of different things. I've done a lot of meditation in life and that sort of stuff, and really got into sort of trying to do some self work. And I think this has been another one of those inflection points. I can tell you that um, there are things that we talked about there, like, what are your sacred priorities? What does it mean to be a man? Who's the man that you want to turn into so you can die well? That, sometimes you go through a session, or any type of session, and you have these pieces that come out of that are really important. But, 3 or 6 months later, you sort of feel them, but they're not integrated, right? This is different. I literally every day, or almost every day, there's some days I miss, but almost every day, I sit down. My life, I'm doing things a lot differently. Sometimes you get up, you just pick up the phone, and what's happening, you start scrolling. I don't do that anymore. I get up in the morning, I go downstairs, I open this book, you said bring a notepad. So I open a book that I brought with me, and almost every day, I'm writing, what are your sacred priorities? Right? My wife and my family, my fitness, my purpose, my friends, fulfillment and fun, and my finances. I write it down every day, right? And then what does it mean to be a man? You'll know the run through the line, choose how you show up, right? Dissolve your shame. Don't run from your emotions, right? I write them all down, right? Every day. And then I read the thing when we wrote, what would it look like to be a man? Do you die well? And I read that every day since we left there. So it's it's taken on this whole, or taken me to this whole different level of consciousness in a way, right? Or presence. If that's probably a better way to think about it, being present, another one of those things, right? What does it mean to be a man? Be present, take responsibility, right? I can go through the whole list, right? And that's a sort of thing that, it was a different type of learning. So it's been a blessing and a real gift to me. So I thank you for inviting me, because it really has. Not to mention our 30-day challenges that have sort of changed a lot about my life already, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
we did a 30-day challenge with this group, and one of them was 25 pull-ups a day.
No, it was,
What
well,
was that?
it was 10,000 pull-ups in a month.
10,000 pull-ups a month. Right. Yeah, yeah. And when I started, and I hadn't done pull-up in forever. I go to the gym all the time, but I didn't pull up forever. When I started, I think I did 2 pull-ups without assistance. And now almost every week I'm doing 50, 60 with no assistance. It's unbelievable, right? So
Yeah.
that's sort of an aside, but yeah, it's been a really amazing thing, or what a great group of guys you brought together, and the discussions that go on. That's another thing, right? That's another piece of this. The discussions that go on amongst these people that come from various different parts of the community, different parts of the world, and how we're coming together. So it's I hadn't thought about it until just this second, Thibault, but I see that why are we so divided, and what creative things can we do to change that in this whole thing? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so for the audience listening, so what Jeff's talking about, we did our first get together was a 3-day retreat at this little farm, and we locked ourselves on, we'll call it on campus, for 3 straight days, 16 of us, and we had 2 facilitators who came in, one black guy, one white guy, who commanded incredible presence
yeah,
and led us through probably the deepest transformation I've ever been a part of in my life. And so it was a series of really hard conversations, building trust amongst each other. There were breath work journeys in there, ceremonies. There were ice baths and cold plunges. There was meditation. There was both physical and mental activities. And I think personally, what I realized through that space, based on the depth of the conversations that we had, and I don't think a single one of us didn't cry at some point during that weekend,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Didn't fully let go of everything we've been holding on to as men, because society has told us that we had to be
That's the
tough
way
and
to
strong.
operate.
And
Yeah,
and the thing that really resonated with me during that whole weekend experience was that we were able to go as deep as we were because we created a circle of trust, because we were able to create this container that felt really safe, where nothing was off limits.
yeah,
And, that's the problem with our world today. That's the problem with this city, is that we're operating in these silos and we don't fully trust the people that we show up to,
yeah,
because we haven't taken the time to build that. You show up to a meeting and you get right into the heart of the thing that feels important to talk about in the moment, which is probably the topic of the business that you're wanting to think about. And that's the least important thing. Um, like, I'm almost picturing one of your guys showing up on what's the demo day that you guys do?
yeah.
And
Demo
they
day.
have 3 minutes to pitch this like incredible thing. and they're like scrambling to get through like a lifetime's worth of thinking and ideas.
Yeah.
Um, if one of those people found 3 ways to build incredible trust with the audience through something completely different and never once mention the business,
Yeah.
I'd almost gravitate more
Yeah.
towards that person,
Yep. Yep.
um,
It's
based
interesting.
on how they prioritized what is most important in um, creating things with people, which
Yeah.
is safe space and trust. And
Yeah.
so we created that together to the point that when we left that Sunday evening to go back to our lives, it felt like you were stepping out into a foreign planet.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of calls and texts that we went through as we all tried to integrate, it was hard showing up. I stood outside of our office door for 10 minutes on Monday morning, wondering if I could walk through it.
Yeah.
I just felt like such a different man. So yeah,
Yeah.
really, really, it was cool because you were, I mean, I think you used the word apprehensive going into it. And
Yeah.
I saw about 3/4 of the way through the first day when you let go of all of that and fully surrendered and went all in. And that was neat to see. And now we get together on a monthly basis for fireside chats. And on a quarterly basis, we get together for some significant kind of weekend long event. And we've got a fun one coming up, I think, in a couple months. We're going to build
Yeah.
a sweat lodge
Sweat
together.
lodge. Yeah. Looking forward to
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, me too.
Yeah. So look, man, this Thibault, this has been really, really fun. Just like you said to me the other day, we just have a good time and doesn't matter if anyone listens or not, just get to a chance to catch up. So I really appreciate you doing this. I want to end with a question because we're building this database here. So I'm going to end with a question because you have to contribute to the database. It's the desert island disk database. So if you're stranded on a desert island and you can pick 5 albums or 5 songs that you must have with you, what are
Oh, that's such
they?
a good question. I'm so musically challenged. My kids and Lola make fun of me all of the time. So I'm definitely bringing Bob. Um,
Uh-huh.
I'd like if I can bring an album, I'm bringing a Bob Marley album. If it's a song, it's Redemption Song.
All right.
Um, I love the Crosby, Stills and Nash Southern Cross song.
Okay. Good.
Um, oh. I um I love Beyonce's Brown Skin Girl song
Nice.
from Lion King.
All right. This is eclectic. I love it. Yeah.
um the What a Wonderful World song.
Yep.
Louis.
Louis Armstrong. Yeah. Okay. You got one more. You can
And
close it out.
I feel like I gotta throw like I think I'm gonna throw like Biggie on there.
Okay. Nice.
Or
This is a good
it,
list.
yeah, that's my list.
All right. Well, look, man, this has been great. Thibault Manekin, Seawall Development, one of my favorite people in Baltimore. We're gonna roll out. I heard something the other day. I was listening to a podcast or NPR or something. There was a comedian on there, and he said, every time I'm talking to someone, do something like this, I close it out the same way by saying, "I love you," and there ain't a damn thing you could do about it.
I'm
So
not gonna try to change that.
I
Love you
love you,
too,
man.
brother.
There ain't a damn thing you do about it. Thanks, Thibault. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on Capitalism Remix. We'll see you all next time here on the Remix. Take care.